We're going to be spending a little bit of time talking about design rule checks, or DRCs, as part of the wire harness validation and development process. And we'll explore why the DRCs are essential to ensure that designs meet functional and compliance requirements, and some of the complexities involved with them. So first of all, you guys are all wire harness domain experts. I don't know how well you can see this graphic here live, but wire harnesses can be a huge mess, like we see here, hard to work with, hard to define, and hard to manufacture. Or they can be a beautiful piece of art, a beautiful work of art. So, does anybody recognize this? This art display? I took this photo a couple months ago at United Terminal 7 at LAX. So I was happy to see that LAX invested in their wire harnesses and felt that they were a work of art. They must have ran really good DRCs. So I'll start a little bit with my background. My name is Arik Vrobel. I've been in the wire harness industry for over 30 years. I was the former owner and CEO of Elcom Systems, and Elcom over time became one of the leading suppliers of aerospace and defense, and in the latter years became one of the leading suppliers of the new space market segment. We had around 500 people manufacturing our wire harnesses, and built a good reputation as an engineering partner to our customers. Our key customers, appreciated that we helped them work through design issues that they were experiencing. I led a successful sale of Elcom in latter stage of 2021 to Aptiv Delphi. And then after retiring for a few months, I decided to unretire and come back into this industry and tackle a problem that I was dealing with at Elcom pretty much every day of my life. In my experience, working with the customers we worked with, and some of them are here in this room, our experience was that nearly 50% of wire harnesses that we were asked to manufacture had design-related errors. So nearly 1 out of 2 had some sort of a design-related error that we felt was avoidable, but yet our customer didn't catch it in their design process, nor did we catch it in our engineering review process. We typically only found those errors as part of our product realization process. And this is what led to the evolution of Cableteque. So I wasn't sure if what I saw represented the industry, and so we took a few polls, and I'll share them with you here. The first one, I don't think you can see this, I'll read it. In your experience with wire harness design or manufacturing, how often have you encountered design errors due to improper component selection? So we kind of pulled this already, and we had 54% say quite often, over 30% of the time, over 1/3 of the time. And actually, more than a quarter said it happens very, very frequently, over half the time. We then asked them, given that you've experienced this problem, which is the number one mistake that you typically see? And a great majority said there's bomb mistakes or omissions. Actually, 73%. And the next category, 23%, said incorrect wire sizing, okay, which is also a bomb mistake. 0, nobody said inadequate protection, and there were some other problems that we found. So we said, why is it that such a great number of errors relating to part selection, bomb omissions, bomb mistakes, could it be related to data sheets? And we asked our users, do you struggle to create component libraries into your catalogs? I talked to somebody here who's just getting a new software and they've got to enter the entire library into their CAD database. And what's the problem, right? So one, there's too many parts and not enough time. It takes anywhere from 20 minutes per part to 40 minutes, depending on whether it's a complex connector. That takes a lot of time. The other group said it's just really complicated. There's, the technical data sheets and specs are not that easy to interpret and understand. Data is not standardized, and so it takes some time. And then final, Paul, is how do you check the design flaws? Again, us as a manufacturer, we almost always found it in production, but what do our other domain experts say? They said as well, manual checks by the engineering team, right? Either the design engineering team or the manufacturing engineering team checks it and identifies the problems. Another group said, my experience, we find it in production. And 25% said we find it in manufacturing. And a small section said we use automated software analysis tools, such as DRCs. 17% successfully use DRCs. Okay? And of course, 0 said our designs don't have errors. So everybody agrees that at some level or another, their wire harness designs had errors. So a little bit about understanding what DRCs are. DRCs are a critical set of automated tools that are used in a CAD or an ECAD environment to identify and potentially rectify design violations on predefined rules. So usually somebody predefines what the DRCs are going to do. It's either your CAD supplier or your engineering department or a combination of both. Their purpose, again, is to create an automated checking system to ensure that the design meets physical integrity, the components fit correctly, they meet the electrical requirements, and they do not violate any kind of spatial, physical, or regulatory controls. So the common types of DRCs that we see in wire harnesses, they're either electrical checks, physical checks, and compliance checks. And then, the role of the DRCs in enhancing the design is to help you, for those that are designing, refine your wire harness configuration so that you can reduce weight, you can minimize cost, you can optimize the assembly process, and you can make the product more manufacturable, which addresses all of those. Okay, so what are the challenges that we see in DRC implementation? There's quite a few of them. One is, in general, wire harnesses have become more complex. There's more sensors, there's more power, there's more computing. Hello. And as the wire harnesses become more complex, in my experience, we were dealing with connection systems that had hundreds of wires with 30, 40, 50 different connectors. and the complexity is very high. And the software that was used to develop them and the engineering skill it needed to be quite deep and have very experienced engineers. There's also, we see an integration issue between the systems. Wiring harnesses require an integration of the mechanical CAD design tools and the electrical CAD design tools. And not all systems are integrated extremely well. Spoke to one user here is using a system that's really a separated standalone between the schematic capture and the mechanical design. And so it's very difficult to integrate the two requirements together. There's, results in a lot of manual process checks. So the tools themselves, the validation tool is not catching all of the potential design errors. The systems don't have the data capability for the design validation. The libraries don't have all of the information. There's an issue of scaling. So I mentioned complexity. As something becomes more complex, we've got to scale the DRCs. So if you've got a wire harness that has multiple bundle diameters and has different protective coverings and different layers of coverings, that becomes more complicated. Again, it's more challenging to validate and to use the tools for the design widgets. And then we've got the industry that's changing. You got to update your DRCs. You got to update your library. Parts are changing, specifications are changing, and the regulatory requirements are changing. And even the environmental requirements that your applications are being required to meet, they could change. So often you're being asked by your program team to use one design in one platform with another platform, right? And you just try to copy the same design, but it may have a different environmental standard that you've got to meet. And it's difficult to analyze and evaluate. And then there's a training and expertise. The operators of the CAD systems need to be experts. They need to understand both the CAD system itself, as well as the parts and the application. So there's a continuous learning and development of the expertise around design workshops. In terms of best practices, like how do we do it well? So we recommend an early and continuous integration of the DRCs. Don't wait till the design is complete to run your DRCs. Use it as early as possible as you're building the design process and throughout the entire design life cycle. So ECOs, repairs, sometimes the repair results in a different component. We've got to run it through the DRC again. Run comprehensive DRCs that cover all aspects of the design and that are customized based on your specific project requirements. So if you're investing in a CAD tool and you're looking for good DRC coverage, you need to make sure that the CAD tool can support customized DRCs that you can create and evolve as your project requirement changes. We've got this concept of automated versus manual checks, right? Of course, automated is better. It speeds up the checking process, reduces the reliance on humans and engineers to check their work. But it doesn't define, it doesn't find everything. It's got some gaps, and so supplement that with manual reviews in critical areas where nuanced judgment is required. Again, you need to make sure that your DRCs and your libraries are regularly updated. Okay, that's really important. As standards change, many of us use IPC 620 as the base workmanship. Some use space addendum. Those standards change. So as they change, the DRCs may need to be updated. And you got to have a team that is able to analyze the change and reevaluate your DRCs and evaluate what needs to be updated. You should have a collaborative DRC process. So you need to make sure it's not one engineer that's writing the requirements. It's a group of engineers. Involve the manufacturing people. You know, in my experience, we see the design and the manufacturing and the procurement and the quality run as separate organizations. We highly recommend that the definition of design rule checks in whatever system you use be done as a collaboration of all of those groups. And you need to make sure that there's constant documentation and traceability, right? We want to see what DRC checks are finding, right? And validate them with what really happens on the production floor. I am certain that our customers that were doing business with my previous company, Alcom, were not all aware of the mistakes that we were finding. Even though, of course, we would update them that we would find a mistake and that we would ask them for an ECO. I'm certain that they did not go back to their DRC rule checking and evaluate if that's something that should have been a parameter that the software should have defined. And we highly recommend that sort of a closed-loop system occur, that as we see things filter through manufacturing or found in quality, then they be brought back to the design group and the team that's responsible to configure your DRCs in your CAD and ensure that the right compliance is adjusted there. So, our company, Cableteque, we have created a design validation application, software-based system that focuses on validating designs from different engineering systems, and say all of them, by just taking an output of the design file and running it through our own independent algorithms for design rule checks, which is something that continues to evolve. And so our approach to DRCs is a bit different than the engineering systems and the CAD systems. And it complements what they do. It's not in conflict, right? So first, we create our own algorithms for the design rule checking that can predict potential issues, both on use-specific cases as well as historical data that we're able to gather. They're automated and they're customizable, so we allow our users to write their own scripts and define their own rule-based requirements, again, based on the industry standards or based on their particular application. Our system enables a continuous collaboration loop. So, as we said before, whether you're the design engineer, the manufacturing engineer, the manufacturing team, the quality team, whether you're the OEM that's designing or the contract manufacturing that's manufacturing, you're able to use the same platform and run the same change, and we capture those change and feedback to whoever's in the loop. And we maintain continuous data, right, and insights about those changes, about what worked and what didn't work, and how it was updated. And we do that holistically across industry so we can improve our insights. As I mentioned, we can provide comprehensive reporting and documentation about what was changed, by whom, by what, and by why, and how, and is that consistent with our recommendation? And then, over time, our future development is to integrate our DRCs directly with the CAD providers, right? So whether you're using a Capital or a Zukin or a Cadonix, or some of the Dassault products or, PTC, we're having ongoing discussions with them to integrate into their systems and provide our additional layer of design rule checking. So, the way we see ourselves is sort of an integration or interconnection between the various engineering platforms that users use. Many of them are here, but it's not exclusive to them. And again, we're having dialogue with many of them about integrating our solution over time. But we also cover what we call here as the rest of the world. So in my experience, there's quite a lot of companies that I call the rest of the world that didn't use those more sophisticated design tools. And they just said, let's depict what the wire harness looks like. Let's put the wire list, the connection list on an Excel, of course, the valve, and let the manufacturer figure it out. Because we're not going to get it right in our design process, nor do we have enough time, and we can figure it out in production. So even in those cases, our application can identify errors, a lot of them, mismatches, wrong selections of parts, right at the tabular data. How do we do this? So we placed a real premium focus on the component library. We see that as the secret sauce, okay? And a lot of you guys that are involved in designing realize the challenges of creating the component library, both in terms of bandwidth and in terms of just getting the right data into the system. And so, the component library is really, really critical, as I said. It is the central repository of all of the designs. And it should include specification data, like the electrical characteristics, the physical dimensions. But often we don't see that it includes part relationships, okay, and compliance data. And in the part relationships, so something like certain connectors have locking mechanisms that they will only accept certain contacts, right? That has to be well defined in your library for a DRC to work well, right? And so the engineer setting up the system needs to make sure that those relationships are well defined. And the compliance data, those are things that later on might be a requirement, like RoHS, or some companies have to comply with conflict materials or even exporting, right? So having the intelligence around your library that can later on be run by different groups to ensure that we meet compliance to the industry requirements. Next, as you set the library up, you need to really consider its impact on the DRCs, right? Each component family is sort of unique. And so when we look at those fit relationships, is the engineer, and I'm assuming the engineers are setting up the libraries, are they really understanding the spec sheet well enough to ensure how it mates with the other components? Are they looking at things like dissimilar metals, right? That's sometimes an issue. So there's got to be an understanding of the application itself. And then when you have a well-managed library, like, it's much better. Things work a lot better, right? And speeds up the design process to provide, quick access to the approved parts and to tested components. It will reduce errors and iterations by ensuring that only the right parts are used. So remember the statistic, the poll that I showed you, 73% of our users said there was an error in the file, right? And so you can eliminate so many errors by having a well-managed library. And of course, as standards are changing, then you've got the right data in the system and you can ensure that it meets compliance with those standards. And then the challenge in doing all of that is, even if you've created the right library, are you keeping it current by looking at obsolescence? Right? Parts become obsolete. Is anybody going in and updating the system? Sometimes certain components go on a prohibited list, right? Is anybody going in and updating the library so that doesn't go into the design process? Ensure that it meets the global standards, right? Again, as those standards are changing, are they referenced in the library? And are you continuously updating and integrating new components as they come up so that the engineers have an understanding of available parts that they can use? So it's a continuous process. The library is a living thing, right? You've got to have, continuously spend time to update and look at the outside world and see what's changing. And even if you do all of that really well, and I've got some of you guys sitting in the back, so you're not going to see these samples, but what we've seen, where you get your data matters. Okay, so we have spent, probably many years looking at supplier and manufacturer data at this point. And we see that data is not all the same, even when it's for the same parts. So I've shown you here some examples that we see between a manufacturer spec, which calls out a chromel material, and a supplier spec, which calls out bronze material for that same shell. Okay? So if you're pulling the information from the supplier website, you're going to set up your system incorrectly. I've got a few more examples. And again, some of you are here at the back, so you got to trust me. We have parts that define the standard, and I'll read what it says. It says, connector designations depicted are for reference only and not to be used in part number developments. Okay, but when you look at the supplier, this -12 right here is on the supplier website. But that part's not manufacturable by the manufacturer. So again, where you pull the data really, really matters. And another example, right? Same sort of thing. This W reference, W1, it doesn't exist on the supplier sheet, but yet these guys tell you can buy it. So what's the reality? It may well be, in this case, that the supplier, the manufacturer data sheet is wrong. Okay, and they've updated the supply, but never updated their manufacturer sheet. So how do you know what's true, right? And the way we do it is we compile data from different sources. So first, we've got engineers that look at spec sheets like anybody else does and define the parts, families and configurations, right? But we've developed software tools to then generate a lot of data at scale for those entire families. So we basically built a huge attribute-based library. Now, that's not enough. We need to make sure it's correct. So we pull data from suppliers and APIs, and we normalize our own data to see if the parts that we've created in our library actually exist in the marketplace. If they don't exist in the marketplace, we don't want them in our library. But theoretically, they could be manufactured. So we have to have a record or a capability to pull those if a manufacturer puts them in the design. But that, again, is not enough, right? Because if you look at a specification sheet of one component supplier, let's say Glen Eyre, and you look at a similar parts, I'll use their Mighty Mouse family as an example. You look at a similar part by Amphenol, it may be an equivalent part, but they represent their data attributes differently. They call them different names, right? And so the library itself, for it to be homogeneous, we need to transform the attributes to a common language. And that's really what we've done, is we're transforming to one normalized language. So when somebody calls and, inside diameter, it's represented the same between the different manufacturers. So ultimately, when you're looking for a certain component in your design, you're not locked into one manufacturer. You know what another manufacturer component would be, and does it meet the requirements? Because the parts can meet the same spec but not work. In my world, we used the mil spec. It's called D38999. And an Amphenol connector and a TE connector meet the same spec, but have variations in their form, right? And so in some applications, they may not work the same. And so those are the things that we capture, and we capture a data model that supports form, fit, and function, and enables the integration of components, and ultimately understanding the alternates. As I said, our data mapping is defined by engineering domain experts, and then it's scaled using software tools. And that's how we can get to a both accurate library and a deep one. We do that by creating sophisticated part generators that enable us to scale and ensure the quality of our data. We complement it with industry and government specifications that will ensure the compliance and the design and manufacturing. So the industry specifications are integrated into our library data. And then what we've done is we've actually integrated it with real-time supply chain information. So we've tied in via APIs to over 20 different distributors of electromechanical components and interconnect components. And through one process, you can have an understanding of whether the components that are selected are obsolete. Are they available in stock? Because they could be not available but still be active. What is the best lead time for those parts? And what's the best pricing? Right? So as you're designing, you have this data. And if you know that your system needs to meet $100, the wire harness needs to meet $100, and your BOM costs $120, you've got a problem. That happened to me quite often as a manufacturer. We had a target price by our customer of $100, but there was a component that was $80, right? So how are we supposed to do that? This guy's laughing, and that must resonate. How are we supposed to do that? So we bring in the data and the knowledge early on in the process. And for those companies that are manufacturers that are not designers, you get to see that on the front end of your quoting or your contract review process, right? This all takes a minute to run. So the features of our software is, as I already said, we read user data from any design system. So whether you're using Azuken or you're using a Cadonix or Capital, we'll read the output data of those systems. We are developing the largest component database that exists in the industry, and it's optimized for this domain. And by large, I mean, we expect to have 1 million parts in our library by the end of this year. And 1 million parts, that's a lot, right? If you ask any of the systems that are out there, you know, if they give you 1,000 or 2,000, some say they'll give you 10,000 parts. That's a lot. So our goal is to have the largest part library. Within 2 years, it will be at 10 million, which at that point encompasses most of the parts in our domain. I've already said we integrate the engineering with supply chain. So it keeps our data active. And when a part becomes obsolete, we immediately know it's become obsolete because we're integrated to the supply chain. Or there's a stop ship on a certain component, we immediately know that there's a stop ship and we can notify our users. And then over time, we're going to use our machine learning algorithms to help you make better decisions about the selection. So to understand what works well in the environment and to make recommendations about what works well, whether it's the specific industry or within your company and based on your designers. Our system, this is a snapshot, hard to see right now. Very, very easy to use. You don't need to be an engineer. You could put your lowest skilled administrative person to upload a design file, and within 1 minute, you will get these insights. If you'd like to see it, we have demos going on at the show. And then the ultimate goal under is to accelerate time to market, minimize the design time. So outside of doing it faster, having less engineering resources required to design. So if it takes, 8 hours to design a complicated harness, we should be able to cut it in half. Increase the product quality. So often what I witnessed is because mistakes were made in the design process, and by the time we found those mistakes was in production, many months have passed. And at that point, there's a panic of getting the product out there. And so there could be compromises about solving that problem, patching, right? And that can result in latent defects. And ultimately, this will reduce cost. So as a case study, we worked with a industrial manufacturing equipment company that was working on a design for a high precision industrial machine. Had, I think, around 200 wires. Their challenge was to ensure that the wire harness could handle both the power and the complex signal pathways that they required for the control and operation of the machine. And while doing so, in maintaining ease of manufacturing, right? And not only that, servicing and retrofits later on. They use the DRCs to validate the specifications of each of the components against our part library, so that they can ensure compatibility and durability under the industrial conditions that they had to meet. And the checks included verifying current, thermal ratings, and the physical robustness of the connectors and wires, and whether they even intermate. And we found several component fits issues that could have led to months of delays. There were 5 critical design errors and more than a dozen warnings that we identified. So what do we see in the future, right? And we're focused on design rule checks. what does the future look like? First of all, we see advanced integration with AI and machine learning, like learning from mistakes, analyzing past data, analyzing trends, analyzing the components themselves and how they're changing, and using those tools to improve the design process. We see the seamless integration between ECAD and MCAD. So again, making those tools work better and covering for the gaps in those tools. Customization and flexibility, like dialing in the tools, the DRCs, to what the users really need and what they use. I spoke to a CAD company up in the hall a little while ago, and they said, we've got 200 DRCs, but our users turn them off, right? Because they make all these noises that they don't really understand or want. It's kind of like a warning in your car. You just don't pay attention to it. So we want you to have the right DRCs that work for you and create value. And the ones that don't work shouldn't even be there as alerts, and we can really focus on that. Integrate that with regulatory compliance and standardization. So understand what's happening in the world, understand what our customers are requiring, and ensure that those are integrated. And lastly, the use of decentralization in the process, right? Cloud-based solutions that are secure, that secure the data, but that enable collaboration. A lot of our customers have designers working from multiple sites, some working remotely. And again, we've got definitely gaps between the OEMs and the manufacturers. We should use the same platform and see the changes or the issues in real time.